Welcome to Conversations. My guest this evening is a lady called Nikki Economou. We're very happy to have her. She's from out of town, out of state, and is offering us a little bit of her time. Nikki represents the CDC. In a couple of early programs, we've talked about how the CDC works with HIV prevention. And she's here in the state for various reasons, and so she said she'd be glad to spend a little time with us. Thank you very much, Nikki, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Well, let's start with a few basics about the CDC. How long has it been in existence?
The Centers for Disease Control started up, I guess, about 50 years ago in response to yellow fever outbreaks and other mosquito-borne problems. And that's why, of course, it was put in Atlanta, because it was such a convenient place for that to study mosquitoes, etc. It's gone through a lot of changes since then.
I imagine. It seems to me, maybe it's because I am HIV positive, but that the CDC all of a sudden is flowering or in its own. Just last night I watched the news, and the CDC was monitoring this Nile flu, and am I correct in that? Has the CDC really been bigger recently?
Well, I think what it's done is just, it certainly has expanded because of HIV. However, you know, they've always, for the last, let's say, a good 30 years, have always been very responsive to emerging infections, any kind of infectious diseases. And of course, we also work on communicable other kinds of diseases, such as chronic illnesses and that sort of thing. But I think CDC's name has been in the paper a whole lot more on the basis of dealing with HIV issues. So I'm sure they're getting a lot more press in that way. And of course, a lot of money is coming from Congress to deal with HIV and other emerging infections.
Mm-hmm. Brad and I were talking about that, and he said that the CDC has kind of become the good guy going in. And on television shows, you often see that someone from the CDC comes in and takes over. Center for Disease Control, for those of you who aren't aware. Let's talk about a bit about HIV. The CDC gives out money to prevent HIV, and it gives it to states, organizations, etc. And you represent the CDC in a number of places.
That's correct.
Montana, and where else?
I've got, for the last 4 years, I've had Montana, Wyoming, Colorado. I now also have Washington State, several directly funded community-based organizations in those states, as well as in Oakland, California. I had New Jersey for a while, and several other states.
At the same time?
At
you
the
were going
same
back
time.
and forth between Montana and New Jersey?
I wish that I could have stayed in Montana, but I've got to go where they send me.
The CDC's efforts at first were through the state health groups, right? The state health departments.
Yes.
Then it filtered down to the local, and I've explained in earlier shows that the community input was very important to the CDC, and they insisted upon regional groups to advise them. But there's a new movement now to work through community-based organizations, and we can't talk about it, but one of the reasons you're here is to work on that. Could you explain why that transition has been made and what the CDC hopes to accomplish by it?
Sure. We still are working very closely with the states, but we're trying to add another, I think, focus just to round things out a bit more. What I mean by that is when we fund community-based organizations directly, it gives them an opportunity to develop some capacity within their organization, to spread that capacity building to other organizations, so that there's a lot more, not just infrastructure, but expertise that's available on a more local level. But we do have a requirement in these applications, in these cooperative agreements, and that's that the community-based organization have strong relationship with the state and local health department. That means that what they'll do is they'll come to the community planning group meetings. They'll give presentations about the kinds of interventions that they're performing, what populations they're targeting, and then the community planning group will say, well, you know, these are the needs that we have. Where can you fall into this? Where can you jump in and give us a hand? So I think that discussion is really important. plus the fact that what we also do is ask that the organizations submit their application to the state health department for their review, so that the head of the AIDS program is familiar with the kinds of things that, the kinds of interventions this group wants to propose, wants to get in there and do.
You and I talk about CBOs, where, for the general public, saying that that's community-based organizations. But what would a community-based organization that deals with HIV, what sort of an organization would that be?
Well, they could do a lot of things. One is they might have funding to help people get through the treatment. Ryan White, for example, funding to get treatment and care. But what we are focusing our attentions on at the Centers for Disease Control is prevention. So what we're trying to do is figure out what's the best way to effectively prevent HIV from spreading from one person to the next person. So we're talking about behavior change. And when you've got a community-based organization that's located in a specific area, the hope is, and the intention is, that the people that are working there have such an intimate knowledge of the behaviors and the populations that are in their area that they're the best people to really target the interventions and such to the people who need it the most. So really, it might have to do with counseling and testing. It might have to do with intensive counseling to help a person change some of the habits or make some adjustments to how they are having sex, for example. So it's basically risk reduction techniques, and it's not just sitting there saying, don't do this and don't do that, but really talking about how two people can have a caring, loving sexual relationship with one another without necessarily putting one another at risk of getting a disease.
Actually, what I wanted to know was what a typical CBO would be. Now, Missoula AIDS Council would be one, but would a church be a CBO, or could it be a CBO, or, in the various counties in Montana, I'm sure we don't have AIDS councils in all of those.
We've got a lot of AIDS councils.
Really?
Yeah. Montana does a really good job of spreading resources out and ensuring that populations have some coverage. Of course, there's never enough money. But in answer to your question, you could have a church that applies for 501c3 funds. What that means is it's not-for-profit, tax-exempt organization. It's a specific funding thing. And if an organization, whether it has to do with a tribe, or whether it has to do with a community-based organization or a church-based organization, if they apply for that kind of thing, that kind of status federally, and the Internal Revenue Service says, yes, you qualify as a non-profit organization, then they can put applications in to get funding from organizations like the Centers for Disease Control.
The way I was kind of heading with this is Montana's a very rural state. We have places that have maybe 1, 2 HIV cases reported, and also in other rural areas in the country where maybe the church is the strongest place, or there aren't other groups in place. Is the CDC pushing in that direction?
We've got some really interesting things going on with churches. It's not been the easiest to make inroads into churches in terms of asking them to deal with HIV and other issues that have to do with sexuality or other behaviors. But we've had more success recently. We're doing a lot of work with minority organizations and minority religions. What I mean by minority religions is, for example, the African American Baptist coalitions, that sort of thing, to try to get the word out to people that are at very, very high risk for contracting HIV, and get the word out in a really socially and religiously acceptable manner. So what happens is we'll for example, encourage organizations to reach out to the ministers. And would you be willing to talk from the pulpit about the importance of realizing that HIV is not a curse, but rather it's a situation, it's an infection, and it's preventable infection, and that sort of thing. So really we try to use any method we can to make the word more palatable and more acceptable to the population, so that they really will buy into the messages that we're trying to fund.
What would you say the status of HIV is now in terms of threat to the general health of the country? Has the tipping point been reached? Has it started going down? Are we still?
Well, in some populations, it started to flatten a bit, but my concern is this. Every time a disease process starts to slow, and that happens naturally with no interventions whatsoever, that's part of an epidemic curve. What troubles me is that people become complacent. They think, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Or if somebody's on medication to try to stop the progression of HIV into full-blown AIDS, other people will look and say, oh, that's a chronic disease. It's treatable. It's easy to deal with. Well, anybody who has been on those kinds of medications knows that it's not an easy thing. It certainly is not a chronic situation where you can pop a couple of pills and continue. It's a difficult situation to take all that stuff. So the complacency thing is always frustrating. Plus, I think people get just real tired of worrying about safer sex. So that's what I'm saying to you is, although there has been an evening, there have been other populations, for example, the African American populations, that and a variety of others as well, that are becoming even more likely to become infected. We have women that are becoming infected at a much higher rate now, and that's of grave concern. We need to get that under wraps, which means that we're funding a bunch of initiatives for that as well.
I don't want to put you on the spot, and you don't have to talk about this if you don't, but one of the ways that HIV spreads is through intravenous drug users. And they're out there. For all you know, I could be one. And so...
And for all you know, I could be one.
Well, that's true. We could both be shooting up after the show. I only said that because sometimes I get in these meetings and people act as if it's something far, far away, you know, as if only a certain kind of people are IV drug users.
Right.
Congress, as I understand it, has been kind of shy about dealing with this issue for the fear that it would be encouraging this kind of drug use. And so would you care to just, how does that issue stand?
It's a tough one because, you know, Congress is who pays our bills. Congress is who tells us what to do, where to go, and how to do it, essentially. And they're very much opposed at this point to looking at harm reduction and techniques in terms of needle exchange and that sort of thing. And on the other hand, we have hardcore science that has proven over and over again in a variety of studies in practical settings that having needle distribution actually does reduce infection. And this is held true in, for example, the state of Hawaii. It's been very successful in keeping the numbers down, not just for HIV, but also hepatitis C. So you've got contradicting issues, contradicting policies, and it's very frustrating for the centers because we have to go according to what our bosses, in fact, tell us to do. However, we also have a responsibility to inform our bosses when, in fact, something works. And I'm hoping that at some point, sometime, the reality will you know, bring us to a more progressive point where we can actually deal with this issue more directly than we have.
Well, lest anyone think that this is an issue that's for big cities and far away, there's an outbreak of hepatitis here in the state among the Native American population in the eastern part of the state, I believe. You bring up an interesting question. When I talked to Brent and talked about the influence of politics upon public health, he said public health is political health and that the two really never could be separated. The CDC must have its ideas what's good for the public, and it does have to mediate those with Congress. How strong is that influence? Is it?
Well, one thing is one of my roles, for example, is to take information from you and from the populations that I serve and bring it back to the centers. And the centers take that information and get it to Congress as well. So it's not just a matter of, hopefully it's not just a matter of CDC saying, okay, we know what's best for the country, but rather we feel strongly that the people that we deal with, the communities that we deal with, really do know what's best for themselves, which means that one community may be ready for something and another community not, and that's just a reality of the situation. So we want to keep a two-way street in terms of the communications, which is a real challenge. So we try to provide as much information as we can, and really flesh out what we see, as project officers out in the area, what we're seeing, and what we feel the needs are, and transmit that to Congress, and just state the facts as we know them.
So the CDC sits in on hearings with Congress? And
Individuals, some of the big guys do, yeah. And sometimes what we have to do is put papers together to discuss. That's a fact sheet, so to speak. We certainly cannot lobby. We don't do that. That's not our role. Nor do we support any lobbying activities anywhere in the country. But we do have to put information together so that people in Congress have a clear understanding of the actual factual situation, whether it has to do with a specific scientific piece or whether it has to do with an incident or whatever. It's just an information paper that's supposed to present things in as even-handed manner as possible, but to give them all the information they need to make a decision.
Is it exciting to work for the CDC?
I think
It's
so.
gotten such publicity, as we talked about, like they're the good guys, they're going to conquer this and that, and they take off. You find it exciting?
I think a TV series is only fair.
Oh.
Yeah, I think it's exciting. I'll tell you what's happening right now. On one hand, you've got huge tragedy happening, like, for example, what's going on in Africa, and frankly, what's still happening in the United States in terms of people's health not being what it should be. But right now we're dealing with, as I said, Africa, with millions of people dying of HIV infection. And what's come down from Congress is their willingness to put in some funds to get some support out there. And what they're going to be doing is sending some CDC representatives to a variety of African countries, and to set up AIDS surveillance processes so we can figure out how many cases are there really, and also to set up some HIV prevention programs. That kind of stuff is very exciting. I mean, it's just, it's state-of-the-art stuff that we have an opportunity to jump in and participate in. And also get a chance to really expose ourselves to a variety of different cultures and get a whole new understanding of how cultural and social systems operate elsewhere. And that, I think, to me, personally, I think that's an extremely exciting thing.
Well, you told me you were going to be going to Africa.
Hopefully.
Are we going to lose you?
No.
No, okay. So you're just, what are you going to be doing?
Well, from what I understand, I've been asked to go ahead and help set up some surveillance, AIDS surveillance programs, but also some HIV prevention programs. So the very first thing I'm going to do is go over and try to do an assessment for a couple of countries. From what I understand, one of them might be Mozambique. So I'm going to start going through my shots and get my papers squared away within the next few weeks and see what happens. What I'm hoping is that I can get temporary assignments overseas for 2 to 3 weeks at a time, periodically, and still keep my hand here because it's where my first love is, my first commitment. But I think it'll be exciting for me to bring stuff back from there and share experiences. And also, one of the things is dealing in rural communities where there aren't that many resources. People that I've encountered have huge, excellent imaginations and great ideas, and who knows, there's no reason I can think of that it wouldn't be really helpful for me to get some of those ideas, some of those approaches, and see, will it work in another setting where there aren't so many resources either. And it might even translate to places such as some of the countries in Africa.
The problem in Africa is so big, and the figures are so staggering, and now they're talking a new drought in Ethiopia. Can it be done? Sometimes I wonder if world leaders are just sort of letting Africa go because they don't know what to do.
That's been asked a lot, and I mean, it's huge. It's so huge you don't even know where to begin sometimes. I hope that isn't the case, but it may very well be. I know that we're ready to go. We just want to get a chance to get in there. And of course, the difficulty is also working with the political situation there locally. We may not be welcome.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, we can't force ourselves on anybody, nor would we want to. But when I read, I try to keep up with what's happening there, and I see some news shows and such that discuss the devastation in different countries in Africa. And I see the kids going through the things they're going through. I mean, being parentless and essentially thrown away because there's no responsible adult willing to care for them. It really breaks my heart. And I think that when countries get too comfortable with themselves and just don't want to get involved in something as difficult as Africa, I think they really need to take the opportunity and take a look at what's happening so they can get back in touch with their humanity again and maybe pitch in.
It does, though, just seem almost impossible. And on top of everything, there are customs we don't understand, political situations we don't understand, tribes, and I spoke to an Episcopalian minister here who was explaining to me the reason that the Episcopalians couldn't do more along the lines of being more accepting of gay people, and he blamed it on African bishops and the fact that they're coming from a totally different background, and then in theirs this is taboo, and they're bringing that in, and you've got all these forces in Africa that just make it seem like it'd be easier to ignore it, and I'm glad somebody's doing something. The CDC works with all of these diseases. Who coordinates that? How is that? Who decides that AIDS is big and malaria is small, or that Nile flu is a big deal and this one isn't? And
Well, this is going to sound like a strange response, but the best answer I can give you is you, the people in the United States who speak to the people in Congress, who have influence over the people in Congress, who vote people in. And really, there are two things that happen. One is people out in the communities make our Congress people aware, and on the other hand, the diseases themselves, once they're diagnosed, certainly bring a level of awareness. And so put the two together, and it's pretty good communication in that regard. We hate to be behind the 8 ball and wait for something to happen, such as that Nile fever, outbreak that happened last year. So now precautions are being taken. But there's always something coming up, whether it's HIV or Nile fever or Lassa fever or, gee whiz, there's so much out there. It's just incredible.
Lyme disease was fashionable for a while. Well, I mean, it was in the news.
I know, and it's really weird because you see these trends and you go, okay, I haven't heard it in a while. Has it disappeared? But it just happens to be the way the news media covers things.
That's one of my, remember when we had homeless kids on milk cartons? Did we find all those homeless kids, or what happened?
I hope so, but I don't think so.
Media just was hot for it for a while, and then it just disappeared. And and Lyme disease was fashionable there for a while. And
but I think shows like yours, for example, keep things back in focus. For example, as I said to you, some people getting complacent about HIV, and what you're doing right now, for example, brings the community back into focus with, no, it's still an issue, and it's a big one. And if we continue to let things slide and say it doesn't really happen in this kind of community, which is not true, then it's going to start increasing. The behaviors are already there all around the country. All you need to do is drop the virus into the situation. So that's what's so frustrating. I hate to think that we're sitting back and waiting for more HIV to come into a community before people become scared and aware.
Well, I plan to talk a fair amount about it on this show. I have the disease, or the virus. I don't know. I don't feel sick, but the virus is there. But what I find is that so many people still think that it's something hush-hush, horrible, and shouldn't be talked about. And I found personally that it liberates you to be able to talk about it openly. And also I hope that people, who do talk to me, who watch the show or whatever, will say, maybe I should get tested, or maybe I should talk to my friends if I do have the disease, that it isn't this, really clandestine thing.
Kind of reminds me of back in the 50s when you couldn't say the word pregnant.
Yes.
PG, and you said it PG, this little whisper. And now we've come to understand that it's a part of life, and unfortunately HIV is also a part of life, and we need to deal with it in a more upfront way.
I've got to tell this story. When I was a kid, there was a girl in the neighborhood who formed a club, and she asked us all what we should name it. Now, I was old enough and sharp enough to know about the AFL-CIO and all these initial things, and I'd heard the women talking about PGs, so I suggested we call it the PG Club. I never lived that
I
down.
bet you didn't.
Because she told the mothers in the neighborhood, and
Oh,
who
no.
all thought it was funny. And yes, there was a time when you just sort of ignored pregnancy,
Oh, sure.
and until it happened, and then it was okay. But well, and also cancer was referred to as the big C.
That's
Cancer was, you didn't want to tell people you had cancer. You didn't want to tell the people that someone in your family had cancer.
That's right.
It's just a disease.
It's almost a superstition sometimes, the way some people treat it. If you say the word, it's going to come about, and that just is bizarre. And we're still dealing with that.
Oh, yeah.
I was seated in an airplane when someone turned to me and said to me, "So what do you do for a living?" And I was grinning from ear to ear because I was proud to say I work for the Centers for Disease Control. And they said, "Oh, that's exciting. So, what kinds of stuff do you do for them?" I said, "Well, I work in AIDS and HIV prevention." And they asked to get another seat. And I found that
You're kidding.
No, I'm talking about even today, contemporary times where people are still afraid to sit next to me. Of course, I had a lot more space I could spread out. It was
Well,
delightful.
yeah. But,
So what are
That's
you going to
good.
do?
incredible.
I really appreciate your asking me to come over and chat.
Well, one last thing. If you had to get a message out there, if you turned the camera and say, this is what the CDC would like to say or do, or this is what you could do, what would it be?
Oh, goodness.
That's a tough question, but
I think you're being
No.
pointed at.
that would be your camera, I guess.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure where he's pointing at me.
Anyway.
I'm blind. Anyway, what would it be? What would my final words of wisdom be? It would be discuss things openly, honestly. Understand that people are people. They deserve love, they deserve kindness, and they deserve to be treated with respect. We also need to take care of the diseases that we have and ensure that if there's any way to prevent them, that those steps are taken so that it is prevented. Because people shouldn't have to go through what, for example, you're going through. And you're looking terrific.
I feel great.
But nevertheless, it's still something that you've got to deal with at one time or another. So I just hope that we can all talk about things more openly than in the past.
Nikki, you've represented the CDC well.
Thanks.
I didn't ambush you, did I?
No.
Or if I did,
Gentlemen,
you covered it
gentlemen,
well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for
Oh,
coming.
it's my pleasure.
That is our show.
I saw his hand waving and I thought, uh-oh, I'm doing something wrong, or wasn't sure.
Or that we didn't go long enough. But what the heck? This is...
Oh, is that a thumb up? It's so bright I couldn't tell. I kind of clutched at the very end. I apologize. What would my final words be? Keep the faith.
That was great. That was great.
How was the time?
34, I think.
So
Yeah, so we're fine.
As long
and,
as we're over half.
You looked right at the camera I wanted you to. That worked perfectly.
I didn't understand.
I'm sure, yeah, it's a little glare there, but I just wanted to make sure that if you did want to, I didn't tell you beforehand that this was the only camera that was going to be able to pick you up directly. That one's right at him. But that was great. So we can take your microphones away from you.
Okay. I like that show. Thank you.
Oh, good. I
Really?
felt the very, very, very end was a little weak, but
Oh,
Oh, no, that was great.
well, I think we got the message out all the way through, that the CDC was responsible.
I hope you weren't offended by my comment about having HIV.
No.
But it is a difficult thing to carry.
Well, the only thing is, I don't think of it, it's been so long that it's...
How long ago did you discover?
When they first had the tests, so
Get outta
85 or
here.
something.
Really?
Yeah, uh-huh.
Are you serious?
I'm just one of those lucky ones that
You're amazing.
I never had a sickness that was, I could directly relate to.
Do you know that I used to work with long-term survivors and do studies, blood studies on them?
Why haven't they done more?
I don't know.
It seems to me that would be, if you could find why some people are survivors and
Oh,
some
no,
people aren't.
absolutely. Not only that, but have been some, you've probably heard about this, some cases where people have seroconverted to negative. I'm not talking about because they don't have any antibodies, because they don't, because their immune system is so poor. I don't mean that. Your
Yeah.
antibodies are going to be
Uh-huh.
gone. But I'm talking about honest to goodness there's been like, I don't even know the specifics about the cases, but it's kind of interesting.
On the trip over.
No kidding.
Therapy.
There are some strains of the virus that are very, very, very slow, and others that are very aggressive.
We had a kid who was 22 years old who died here locally.
Oh, what a heartbreak.
And, it had to be early in his sexual experimentation. Wow, that church was full. He was well loved in the community, and the kids respected him.
See you later.
When I used to run a clinic, I drew a lot of bloods on people because I was doing these studies. And we were trying, Newport Pharmaceuticals had some immunomodulators to boost the immune system. That's before we knew it was HIV, though.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I wound up sticking myself pretty badly. A person that I drew like 13 tubes of blood, and he had full-blown AIDS. And it was a mess. It was really a mess to stab myself like that. At the time, we didn't even know it was a virus. And it took me a couple of years before I could even get tested because we didn't even have HIV testing at the time. Amazing. My natural inclination served me well, but that was to just go ahead and cut the area and I get bleed like a son of a gun. And that worked, but I'll tell you what.
So you managed not to?
Not to get infected.
No.
But it was interesting. So many people I worked with in the clinics. God.
Oh, those were scary days.
They were awful days.
I didn't talk to anybody for a couple of years.
Oh, really?
And you hear those things about the people in the South, their homes being burned out.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was
working in the food industry,
Yep.
and that was...
How about the Ray family down in Florida? They have a bunch of rodeos down there. They were a family I worked with. I can't remember the name of the town. Anyhow, she went to her minister and talked and said, my sons have HIV, hemophiliac kids, and that's the ones that got run out of town and their house burned down and all that stuff.
Was it Homestead?
No, it was north of Homestead. It was Arcadia. That's it. Arcadia. Man, was that a trip. The minister. God, I could have shot that guy.
Oh, not horrible. For me, it was all psychological problems, but they were just as bad.
Oh, were you kidding? Sure.
I never told my parents.
Really?
My parents suspected, and when I finally did tell them, my dad was like, so, well, why didn't you, if you thought maybe, why didn't you ask? Why didn't you tell me?
Yeah.
So he was reading articles on HIV and AIDS, in case his son had it.
Yeah.
I was afraid to tell him, and, for years, and that really drives a wedge in your family.
It's the same thing about hiding being
Any
gay.
of those secrets, yeah.
It's secrets, yeah.
There are things I don't have enough secrets, but
No, not nearly enough.
I need a lot more.
It's entirely too open. It's, sometimes...
Just say no, huh?
Sometimes there are things you should hide, You know what I'm saying? I mean, not the really important stuff, but...
This is a friendship between one of the most open people you ever meet and one of the most guarded.
Oh, no kidding. That's a nice combo,
Yeah, it is a nice
Kind of help each
combo.
other through things.
I think it works out.
I'm learning to keep my mouth shut more on occasion, and he's becoming a little more outgoing.
A little.
Well, you're doing the TV show.
That's true.
Well, Nikki, that was just wonderful. And so,
Yeah, it was a
Thanks
pleasure
for
to have you.
having me.
I'm really glad.
You're very
We were pretty disappointed that at first, because we couldn't get a hold of you, and then it all just fell together, so.
Well, I had gotten an email, but I couldn't open it because of, like I said, the phone line thing. And then Randy said to me, I guess you're going to miss that. I said, what are you talking about, And so he said, well, let me pick up the phone and see if it's available. I said, whatever,
I'm so glad because Ed had just ordered his first drink.
Yeah, I know. I was worried that when I met you, you'd smell alcohol and think this is some kind of, shady operation, fly by
Well,
night.
that would have been exciting, too.
Well, there's that, yeah.
Some of us adrenaline junkies are like, I thought I'd be, by the time I got to this age, I wouldn't be an adrenaline junkie anymore, but it's still there.
It's an addictive drug in itself.
Oh, is it?
Oh, yeah.
Ooh,
Oh, yeah.
is it ever?
You jumped out of a plane yet?
No, but you know something, first of all, it's an intention I have. Second, I do a lot of parasailing.
Oh, you do? Oh, great.
I go to the highest you can go in the country.
Wow.
That's 1,600 feet. That's a quarter of a mile up in the air.
That's where they, behind a boat, and you take off.
Oh, boy, is that...
I could hear him laugh.
You just feel like, and I have acrophobia, which is, you know, so I get the willies as I'm going up, and then all of a sudden I'm like, let it go. And it's a great experience to let it go. You get things into perspective so nicely.
Sounds like a lot of fun. I want to jump out of a plane.
Yeah.
I called, and it just seemed to be a bit too much money for me at the
I
time.
want to do a tandem thing, though.
Well, I think they make you at first, at
Oh,
least
that's
in
great.
Montana. They do. And then once you've completed that, you can go by yourself. But I guess a lot of people object to the tandem.
Do they?
And I wouldn't.
No!
I'd rather have some trained professionals strapped
thank
to me
you.
as we're
Yeah.
falling from the, through the air. Yeah, absolutely.
Jeez.
Where is the,
Well, I guess it's time to hit the dusty trail.
Yeah, what are you doing for the evening? Are you?
I'm going to have to type up that stuff and send it by email tonight.
Oh,
It's going to be in by tomorrow morning.
goodness.
They cracked that whip, man.
I bet you'd be out partying with people.
I'd like to party with people. Actually, I was going to give a call to Annie and see what she was up to also.
Someday?
Yeah.
I want to get her on the show, too.
Oh, she's just so cool.
Now, her I might put on the spot.
She's a
I'm
little-
such an anti-numbers person.
Are you?
I mean, I would, I don't know, say, you're judging the success of these things on those forms? I've never filled one out.
That's part of a Congress, you know, they've been really pile driving that whole thing about bean counting. In the same token, rather than allowing it to be bean counting, I'm hoping that we can turn it into something productive.
How do you measure success?
A lot of different ways. And the more clever you are, the more ways you can reflect that, and that's exciting. That really is. I hate bean counting, but I tell you what, when I finally bit the bullet and realized, okay, this is going to have to be, and then I started thinking of ways, I mean, for real, to give credit where credit is due, so to speak, to be able to keep the monies coming through. It's amazing what you can do.